Today on the podcast, we're talking about the needs of special needs students from the perspective of parents. I'm grateful for today's guests, Melissa Lee and Heidi O'Hanley, for opening up about their experiences and letting us learn from them and their families. Our conversation was deep and emotional, so have the tissues handy. This is Cindy Ingram, and welcome to the Art Class Curator podcast, where we're taking art out of the dark with thoughtful explorations and in-depth interviews designed to ignite curiosity and delight in art classrooms everywhere. All right, I am so excited to welcome Melissa Lee and Heidi O'Hanley to the podcast. Welcome, ladies.
Thanks for having us.
So we are going to talk today about the parent side of being a parent of a special needs child and how to work with teachers. And all of us here both have a special needs child and have been educators in some way. So we come at it from multiple perspectives. And so I thought this would be a good group to get together to talk about some of these issues. So why don't we go through and talk about our children and what we're going through with them. So Heidi, do you want to start?
Sure. I have two daughters. One is in 5th grade and my youngest is now in kindergarten. When we had my youngest daughter, we kind of felt something was a little different within her first year because we were noticing she was a little bit further behind in development. And we noticed about 12, 13 months that even though she was starting to talk, she was starting to also revert. And we looked into early intervention. We went through the process of getting her diagnosed, and she is indeed autistic. So she was going to a special education center for preschool, and now she's in a blended kindergarten class.
Awesome. Okay. How about you, Melissa?
I have two kids. They are my daughter, who's a 3rd grader, and my son, who is a 1st grader. And it's my oldest child who has special needs. And that was challenging for me as a first-time parent because, there were probably moments where I could have noticed things that were ahead or far behind in developmental milestones that could have clued me into more that was going on. But it was really hard since I had no basis for comparison. I mean, I had been a high school teacher, so I hadn't been through the whole toddlerhood development phases. And, we noticed some things about my daughter that would, we'd sort of laugh about like, she was ADHD in the womb, or, she seems like a really wild toddler, or things that, she's just really introverted. And there were lots of ways that we tried to place different labels on what we saw going on. But it did occur to us by the age of 3 or 4 that there were some really atypical developments when we compared her to her peers. And that led us down the track of also seeking early intervention. And we were in the state of Texas at the time and had missed the window where we could have gotten intervention directly from the state. So we actually went through our school system to try to get her identified. And so she's now had an IEP, an individual education plan. She's had that since she was 4 years old. And she did, much like Heidi's talking about, she did a blended pre-K program, and now she's been in public education since then.
Awesome. And for the listeners who don't know, me and Melissa have been friends since our daughters were little babies. Mine was in a stroller the first time.
I should mention what the diagnoses ended up being.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
That'll be kind of relevant. But yeah, so my daughter is diagnosed with ADHD combined type, as well as sensory processing disorder, an autoimmune disease called celiac disease. And then the biggest and most challenging of the 4 conditions she has is a condition on the autism spectrum called social communication disorder.
Yeah, that's a list. So my daughter is 9 and she is in the 4th grade. And she has always been very high anxiety and a lot of sensitivities. And I always brush that off. No, I didn't brush it off, but I notice this because she's exactly the same way as I am. So when I see her avoiding loud noises or avoiding crowds, I'm like, obviously, because her mom is the same way. So, but she always had sensory issues and was diagnosed with sensory processing when she was, I don't remember, 3 or 4. And then, so I started homeschooling her to start because I didn't think she could handle the public school. And my husband had gotten laid off 2 years ago, and she had to go to public school because I had to go back into the classroom. And that's when everything kind of went crazy not crazy with her, but we had to put her in the local public school and did not handle that very well. Her anxiety just went through the roof, and they did all of the special ed testing on her, and they did diagnose her as autism, but is really high anxiety is her main issue. And she also was diagnosed as social communication. So she has social communication and sensory processing. we actually have her on medication, and she is doing amazingly well right now. It's like a switch has been flipped on her, and she just tried out for the news team and is on the news team at school, and then she'll do the morning announcements. I don't think I told you yet, Melissa. It's so amazing. She hasn't done it yet, but she tried out and she made it. She's going to be like on video in front of the whole school. So anyway, she's doing really well, but that school has been really an amazing experience for us. They really helped us through. There was some of the hardest months of my life going back to work, and also dealing with her. Just, you had to pull her out of the car every day just to get to school. So it's been a journey, but huge turnaround in her life. So awesome. Well, let's talk about, I kind of broke up our conversation. I can create an outline here of different topics that we can talk about in relationship to working with the schools. So I thought we would start with relationships and communication, because that is really what it all boils down to in the end. So as a parent of a special needs child, what sort of relationship do you want with your child's teacher?
Well, with being an educator myself, I feel it's important to be able to communicate by phone or email to just keep on track of everything going on. What I appreciate from my daughter's teacher is a little blurb of what happened during the day, so we can keep track on if she had any meltdowns at school, if she did or did not eat, there was something that she struggled with. I like knowing those things, so that way, as I mentioned, I keep track to see how exactly she's doing. With starting off in the regular public school now in a blended classroom, we're actually finding that her transitioning is regressing, and she is having a lot more meltdowns at school. It's been a few weeks now, and it's getting a little better, but I'm just really glad I'm hearing from the teacher how everything is going. One thing I did forget to mention earlier too is that my older daughter, she does have a 504. We had her diagnosed ADHD in 3rd grade. It took us a while to diagnose her because she was pretty mild, but she had a lot of issues with focusing in school, and we didn't catch it until around 2nd grade. So her classroom teachers were documenting her progress in class and keeping in touch with us and everything going on. And with getting documentation done with a doctor, we were able to finally get the diagnosis and the resources she needed to help her succeed in school. That was extremely helpful, just being able to communicate with the teacher.
Yeah, so you just a couple sentences and do it by email, or do they write it in their sort of daily book?
The little blurb at the end of the day is on a sheet of paper. They have like a binder where they add a page each day, so I can keep track and take a look through it. And if there's anything out of the ordinary, it's normally by email, or they can give us a phone call.
That's great. Melissa, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So we've actually moved around a lot in the last few years. And so my daughter was at one school for pre-K, and then another school for kindergarten, another school for 1st and 2nd grade, and now a new school for 3rd grade. So communication has definitely been key in terms of having to onboard an entire new slate of professionals to working with my daughter. And, I remember it was in my 2nd year as a private music teacher that I was working through a school district that a student was assigned to me who, I didn't meet them, I didn't meet their parents, and it turned out that they had extreme developmental needs. And it was an 18-year-old boy, and he was 3 times my size. And I had no idea what I was doing because I hadn't been trained to teach music to a child with those needs in the first place. But I had no communication with this child's family. I had no information that could have helped me know that, oh, he stands a little close, or, oh, he likes to hold people on the shoulders, or all kinds of things that could have helped me as a young teacher both navigate the awkwardness of working with a child who has atypical needs, as well as what tactics and strategies do you know work with your kid. And so I've taken an extremely proactive approach with my daughter's teachers that I like to call being a little extra. And that is basically like this year, before school even started, I had reached out to the principal. I had reached out to the teacher via email. The minute I found out her teacher's name, I had connected her to last year's teacher and said, here's a resource for you who wants to talk on the phone. Here's her phone number. You need to call her now. As well as here's a PowerPoint presentation. It's 8 pages long about my daughter. And I thought, this woman's going to think I'm crazy. And I talked to my daughter's former nanny, and I talked to my daughter's former after-school program director, who both said the same thing to me. They said, Melissa, she's going to think you're crazy until she meets your daughter. And then she's going to go, where did that PowerPoint presentation go? And so when I went to the back to school night and got to meet the teacher, I was the first one in the door. And I was like, hi, so about the PowerPoint. She was like, I love it. send more. And
Wow.
I was like, okay, this is going to work. And so, different schools, different sets of faculty, I've seen different things. And I really feel like the proactive approach, I know parents who say, I just kind of want to see how the year goes first. And then I don't want to give my child's teacher any preconceptions about, oh, my child isn't going to be able to succeed. Meanwhile, I'm like, okay, you need to know right now that certain things will happen, because I've known this child for 8 years. Certain things will happen, and here are some tried and true things you can do to deal with that in the classroom.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And especially what you were talking about with your experience as a music teacher. And I think that happens a lot with the art teachers is we're given all the children, especially as an elementary teacher. And sometimes we don't get the paperwork, the special ed paperwork, until week 6 or week 7. And so we've been having these children in our classroom for weeks, and we're like, I know that I need to address this child differently and I need to accommodate for this child, but I don't know what those accommodations are. And I have 20 other kids who also need accommodations, but I have no paperwork. And, so I think having the information at the start is so important. And it might seem like a lot of extra work for the teacher to have all of that extra stuff, but it's only can make their experience better. So in regards to that, Heidi, as an art teacher, how has your experience with your own children affected your teaching?
I've noticed a dramatic difference in how I do work with my kids. With having a child going through early intervention and the meltdowns and tantrums and the wonderful parts of her personality as well, I see similar things with some of my students. I do receive the paperwork from the special ed department and even from the nurse. It's actually requested in the very beginning of the year to gather whatever documents, and documents update throughout the year, and I'm just glad that we have open communication with that. But in having the students in my room, I notice certain quirks that, like, say, for example, I have a severe ADHD student who is so incredibly picky with their artwork that they just start becoming oversensitized and start melting down in a way. Providing spaces in my room for them to decompress, to calm down and go on back to their work, knowing where the boundaries are in being able to help them one-on-one, knowing when they need a break, making sure that the paraprofessionals that are coming into the room, what they're aware of and where things are at, so that way we're all on the same page. It was a huge step, like knowing personally as a parent what it's like, and also being a teacher. It, as I mentioned, dramatically changed everything for the better. So I've even been able to communicate more with parents from my end, because as a parent, I like hearing what's going on. So I'm sure they have too. So there's a lot of accommodations that I've been making, like with the lighting, seating, whatever I possibly can to make it better for the students in the classroom.
Yeah, I had the same experience. And even when I became a parent, I became a different teacher, because you have your own kids, and now all of a sudden you see, I'm not saying people who don't have kids aren't good teachers, but it just like changes your perspective. And then when you have a kid, then you have a different kid and you're like, okay, well, this is changed. It made me more patient. It made me I think it became more about making sure that kid was okay and making sure that kid felt comfortable more than make that kid feeling like a burden on me. And I think that switch happened when I started to go through this as a parent, because I feel like everything you said, the same thing kind of happened in my experience as well, for sure. So as a teacher who doesn't see the kid all day, you only see them for a short period of time, how can you facilitate that communication when you have so many students?
I'm a big advocate for communicating any way possible. So I talk with the principals, I talk with the special ed department, I talk with the classroom teacher, and the parents I even get to know. I love open house because all of the parents in the school, they come and they swarm my room at the very end, and I take the time to meet them individually. I collect their emails because I also run Artsonia, so I'm able to communicate that way as well and share the artwork that their children create. And if there's any days that are really, really amazing, or if the child just wasn't really having a good day, I still feel the parent should at least be aware of what's going on, or even the classroom teacher. I communicate whatever I can. What I love about the Google Docs is that we can also create documents to help keep track and keep notes on specific students that we are attempting to kind of document and keep track of for any diagnosis, or if they are diagnosed, and we're trying to just keep record on how things are going. So we're big advocates, as I mentioned, for any way of communicating possible.
Yeah, I love the idea of using Google Docs. Did the parents have access to that document? What are the legalities of that?
Print it and send it home, yes, but they're not added to the email itself.
Yeah. And I love too the sharing stories of your child, because I know sometimes we only hear when things go bad. And so I like being the art teacher because I can be like, this kid in my class was so delightful today and really loved this project and they really got into it. And I think sharing those little stories here and there, like when I see a parent in the car line or, I had just happened upon a parent, in the office, they want to hear that their kid is being delightful.
I wanted to share a story of my daughter. First week of kindergarten, brand new school. Her PE teacher was brand new to teaching. It was her first year of teaching, and it was her first day of school. And she lost my kindergartner during PE because she took off. And as with many special teachers, had not been given any information to watch for, this child who, by the way,
she runs off.
And of course, she felt terrible and she had to find my child. And I don't even remember where she was because this is not the only time a teacher has lost my child in the last few years. Now her first grade teacher lost her on the first day of school. So but what ended up happening is that incident, because it was a negative and it was actually quite career forming for this young woman. She and I developed a friendship that has lasted until now. She is now the after school program director at my daughter's school, at the new school. And she helps my daughter then navigate social relationships. She gives me every one of those wins, like you guys are talking about, like here was a really good thing that happened today, because now she's with my daughter like 3 or 4 hours every afternoon until I get off work. So, there was a negative incident. It called her attention to the fact that maybe this child is going to need a different approach than typical children. But what it did was it encouraged her and I to form a connection so that we could keep that line of communication going. So even the negatives, assuming your child is found and safe, are really turning into positives.
So far, she has always been found. So...
She's not with me now, though, so I don't want to get too cocky.
We used to plan birthday parties. I'd be like, okay, is this a walled-in area? We wanted to keep her safe. We love her.
Well, we did lose her once at a Halloween party. So,
that's right.
There's
That's true. That was epic. That was an epic party. All right. So I love all of these communication tips. Can you think of any, before we move on to a different category of conversation, can you think of any other communication tips or ideas that either parents or teachers can use?
Well, you mentioned the concerns about sensitive data and legality, and some teachers have restrictions around what they can do with their phones, for instance. But one of the ways where I've really used text messaging as a critical tool is that, I mentioned that my daughter and my son have celiac disease. And so here they have this special diet that they have to adhere to. And it's so quick for a teacher to be able to snap a picture of an ingredient list or the back of a label and just text it to me, and I can just thumbs up it or say no, or that has been a nice little quick exchange where when something like a medical condition and we'll see that, like I have type 1 diabetes and many parents of kids with type 1 diabetes just a quick exchange of, a data point or a label or something just to be like, are we good? Do we need to do something? If you're in an environment where you can use your phone for that type of thing and it's not, not a problem, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. The legality thing of working in special ed is so hard to navigate as teachers because there are so many laws, which are important laws, but, we have to keep the files in a locked cabinet and, it's hard to access the files when we want to access them I would always get scared I'm going to do something wrong. And that's tricky. But living in the future is amazing with the phones. I love it. So many ways to communicate. Any other ideas on communication tips before we move on to a different topic?
Trying to think of other things that I've done. Postcards is another good way, especially when the students create their own little drawings in my room. I like having them writing little notes for the parents. I had a student, I was actually discussing this with the junior high art teacher today. We had meetings all day. and she has taken on one of my previous students, and he always enjoyed creating comic book characters. So whenever he finished his artwork early, he would pick up any scrap paper possible in my room and create all of these little characters and give them away as gifts to all of the classmates. And now that he's in junior high, he's developing this whole comic book series. So being able to see his progress and how much he's done has been absolutely amazing. But getting back onto the postcard ideas with how he used to draw images on little pieces of paper, he can write little notes and then they can be sent home for the parents to see different images and things that they can collect.
I love that. Because I think, creating as many positive interactions as we can will only good. I mean, in the world in general. Another thing, too, you had mentioned, I just was reminded of it, is working with you mentioned talking earlier with the paras that are in your room with the students and communicating with them. I had an experience where I had it was called functional life skills, the school I was at, and it was students who were not in the regular education classrooms. So they were very, didn't communicate well, often didn't speak, and weren't toilet trained and things like that. So they were very low performing in that way. But they would come to art once a week, and I would have them do different things. I really loved working with those kids, but they used to break the crayons, and it would drive me crazy because they kept breaking the crayons. And I'm like, don't break the crayons. I'm like, these are my crayons, don't break them. And then finally, teacher was like, we teach them to do that because it helps them hold it better. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that would have been good to know instead of me getting onto these kids the whole time about breaking the crayons. So, I mean, just little things like that. I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. Go ahead and break the crayons. I'll buy some more. So, it was little things like that just will make our interactions with our students more positive and more helpful. And we're doing the right thing for the kids. I love that. Okay. So let's talk about curriculum and how we can create an environment in a good learning environment and differentiate for our students. So any ideas on that?
I do actually have all of my special needs students following my curriculum. We have students with a variety of needs. For example, I do have a student who's Down syndrome, and he needs a lot of one-on-one assistance in getting his work done. I'm very happy to have the paraprofessional in there because we're extra encouragement to help him in creating. He doesn't like drawing very much, but he loves to paint. So a lot of times we'll work with the student on getting the basics down. And then once we get the foundation of the artwork created, then I allow the student to kind of go a little bit on his own with working with either the marker or crayon or with the paintbrush. Loves painting. And I love how happy he is at the end when the project's finished. When at first he's not happy with what's going on, and then in the end he's very pleased with his own work. It's absolutely wonderful. And then I have, as I mentioned previously, I do have a severe ADHD student, but he's a state art award winner. He put so much effort into one of his projects, and I was so proud of the fact that he was able to do this project on his own without any assistance that I submitted it, and bam, he won state art. He was 1 out of 45 students chosen a few years back. And he still, to this day, talks about how happy he was to receive that award. So just providing whatever opportunities I can for my students, no matter what level they are at. With the paraprofessionals being in the room, I make sure communication's open. I do enjoy them walking around and helping me out with the students who need it. And even sometimes when the students are doing really well and going off on their own, meeting paraprofessionals making their own, because when the students see that we're working on it, it encourages them to continue on as well.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think finding something that they can get enthusiastic about, because I have one student who sounds similar to yours, and that he didn't like to draw, and he didn't like most of the things that we did, the whole semester. But we were doing just a random little quilling activity right before Christmas because it was just kind of a little filler. He got so excited about this quilling act. He was making all these paper sculptures and he was going totally off book for the project, but he was so excited. And I've never seen him get so excited about anything before. And it's amazing just to see that spark, that if we can just find the thing that lights them up, that we're making an exciting impact.
I had a 4th grade student last year who loved orca whales. So every single one of his art projects had an orca whale in it in some type of form, even if it was just a still life. He added it on to a little cup that he drew. It was hilarious.
Oh, I had a first kindergartner who it was jaguars, and they were so cute, like little jaguars. Oh, he was the best. And it was just little kindergarten drawings. I loved them.
You know, my daughter shines in sketch. Like, she loves to draw. I don't even know how to describe it, but she draws stick figures like I've never seen before. Stick figures who have subtlety and grace and nuance, and they're stick figures, not like, okay, I draw stick figures like everybody else draws stick figures. And this is on a whole other level. And one of the things that it makes me realize is that each of these kids in their traditional classroom academic environment, where they're doing these things that are a little more left brain oriented and often more monotonous and repetitive, in a way that for some kids is actually, beneficial and soothing, and for other kids is the worst possible thing for their brains. Just like typically developing kids, the creative exploits that they can do in art and music and theater are chances for them to just absolutely, tap into a different place, right? And so we can't assume that any one child with their special needs is going to, to be a savant in art or to be able to unlock that. But we have to assume that just like all of our typically developing kids, they may really, really benefit and crave an opportunity to do that kind of curriculum. And so, yeah, they might need modifications. My daughter, I freak out every time they want to do, pasta art with my kids, because I'm like, do we have to do pasta? Like, is there nothing else that we must have them play with gluten? Like, please, I'm sorry, we can't. They have celiac disease. Which also, I have a woman that I work with who said, one time she was doing art with a rural community, and a woman asked her, it's like, wow, you have so much food that you can make art with it. And she was like, the privilege that comes from, wasting our pasta to make a pasta art. But, it's just remembering that each of these kids has their own way that they tap into their creative side, and that probably only minor modifications are needed to follow a curriculum.
It's funny, like my daughter's the same way with the stick figures, and she can draw them far better than I can. And they have so much expression and so much emotion. She can capture any emotion possible. And I even catch her sometimes practicing emotions, like in the mirror or on her phone, like with the camera switched and looking at her face, and she's practicing different emotions. And I always thought it was just she was practicing acting, because she's very good at acting as well. But when she was going through her diagnosis process and all the special ed stuff, we would do forms, and I'm like, I think she's trying to recognize like what other people are, what their faces are doing. I think that's part of like her social communication disorder, is she doesn't really know how to like recognize when someone's upset. Like I could cry in front of her for probably 6 years of her life, and she wouldn't know what was going on. Like she wouldn't even notice. And then she started taking her anxiety medication, and I was crying one time. I think it was right after the election, honestly. And she was like, what's wrong with your face? And I was like, I'm sad. I was like, that was weird. But I just noticed like, oh, she's finally outside of her anxiety enough to notice my emotions. And it was really a weird moment. But yeah, she does processes it through her art and through her video making and her drawing.
Yeah, like my daughter does not hold typical conversations. And if you try to have a back and forth with her, it's just not, like, you can just tell that she's not engaged in the conversation. And yet she has a YouTube channel where she tells stories, and she can do dialogue between two characters talking. She can write stories where the characters have dialogue back and forth. And so she understands the back and forth of conversation. But in the actual execution of it, she really, really struggles. And it could be, there's issues of the way with someone's executive functioning and their processing, that because they can't anticipate what the other person's going to say in real life, that they can't do the back and forth. Whereas on paper or in art or in story or in song, they can control the characters and make them communicate. And so, it's just another of countless examples where we assume that a child can't something, and it turns out that they can. It's just different, right?
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, that's exactly it. My youngest daughter, I don't feel I can have full-on conversations with her, because a lot of the times she's not fully comprehending what it is I'm trying to ask her. Like, if I even say, what are we going to do tomorrow? She doesn't understand that. She's in kindergarten. But if you play a song, or if you start dancing, she picks up on it, and you will sing that entire song, every word for word. and she soaks it up, and just the light that shines from her is just so amazing. So it's just, you are correct 100%. It is looking at things different. It's having an open mind with all of our students that we see.
The reason I homeschooled to start is I was so worried about my daughter losing that sparkle, because she did the same thing. Like when she was in her element and she was doing her thing, like she was so bright and shiny and wonderful, but it wouldn't be that way around other people. And so I didn't want to take that out of her. I didn't want them to kill that part of her through a school. But thankfully, the school that I put her in is so good at really working with her. They don't try to conform her to be any certain way, but they are really good at like understanding her. And like her teacher last year could pay attention to her and notice when she was feeling anxious. You could tell, she would withdraw, or she would be asking to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes. Like that's what she does when she is feeling stressed, is she needs to go to the bathroom. And like in the car ride, like she'll ask to go to the bathroom every 10 minutes. But the teacher was like, okay, I see this is going on with her. So I'm going to send her to the office with a note. So she would just write some random note. She didn't need to send the note to the office, but she would let her go take a note to the office, or go get a mint from the nurse, or, just let her go stand in the hall. And like, she noticed her and didn't make her change. She just worked with her. And I love schools that do that. And then the special ed teacher really gets to know her really well too. And like, she'll go in there, she'll like sit on the beanbag chair for like 10 minutes and play with this little squishy shower gel in a baggy thing. And then she'll go back to class and she's fine. But it's like, they're noticing. And I think
noticing is everything. When I went to back to school night and I'm talking to the teacher, she hands me a folder, and inside it is some construction paper and some stuff with the dotted lines to cut out. And she said, I noticed that she was getting really, really anxious and like overly concerned she was feeling pressured about being able to cut the objects out for the scrapbook page. And she doesn't need to feel any pressure. She can just go home and do it on her own time and just send it back when it's done. And it was the fact that it was not seen as your child refused to do the activity, or I'm going to get all like verklempt here, or it wasn't your child can't, she obviously doesn't have the scissor skills to do this. It was, I noticed that this was causing her stress. And there's no need for that. Let's just change the environment in which she does the activity, change the timeline by which it's due, and, get it to me when she's happy to do it. So she and I sat on the couch one night and cut out, the shapes to go on her scrapbook page, and she was delighted to color it and put it together, but it just took it out of that moment. And it was the noticing that was everything. Yeah,
that's so huge. Even like the principal at my daughter's school will have my heart for the rest of my life. Like, she's amazing. My daughter had a flare up last year of her anxiety, and the principal had lunch with her every day. Like, she noticed she was struggling, and so she would sit with her at lunch. And I went to have lunch with her on Friday that week because she was struggling so bad. I just wanted to check in and have lunch with her. And the principal's like, "Oh, glad I can be off duty." I'm like, "What do you mean?" They didn't even tell me the principal was having lunch with her. She just did it. And like, she would have lunch with her, and then the next day she would sit at the next table over and then watch her. And then my daughter would do a little, if she was starting to feel overwhelmed, because the lunchroom causes her stress with all the noise, she would make a little hand signal, and then the principal came and sat with her. So it was just not any sort of putting a lot of focus on her. It wasn't drawing attention to her. No one really knew why the principal was eating lunch with her. She just did it, because she noticed my kid needed it. And that school, it's so good.
Yeah, I had my daughter's second grade teacher last year. They went on a field trip, and I have always chaperoned the field trips and for years now. And I always have one child assigned to me. Strangely enough, I don't get the 4 like all the other chaperones. I get this one child who happens to be my flesh and blood. It actually happened where my son and my daughter had field trips on the same day. And, since I have 2 children, I decided to let my daughter go on hers without me. And so at the end of the day, as you guys have mentioned, trying to get details out about how the day went is very challenging with an atypical communicator. And so what I did get is, she said, I was in Miss B's group. Miss B is her teacher. And I was like, "Oh, who else was in Miss B's group?" She said, "Nobody else. Just me." And I said, "Wow." And she said, "Yeah, Miss B said she was the luckiest chaperone in the world."
Oh.
And I was just like, oh my God. And it turns out, yes, she announced that on the school bus on the way to the field trip that she was the luckiest chaperone in the world because she had just my daughter in her group. And, when a teacher behaves like that, it actually models emotionally, it actually models compassion to the rest of the children in the classroom. And I've seen it in reverse. I've seen it where in kindergarten, my daughter did not have that experience. She had a teacher who modeled impatience with having to stop the lesson or correct the behavior time and time and time again. It was a very able teacher, been in the business a long time, has seen many children come through, but did not model patience. And the teachers that we had the last couple of years really model acceptance and understanding. And they have conversations about, there was a moment in second grade where my daughter is much like you're talking about your daughter, Cindy. My daughter doesn't do well when she's in a group of people. So the children would all go down in the floor for circle time or reading time or, question and answer time with the teacher. And my daughter would be sitting many feet back in a chair with a book, seemingly completely in her own world. And one of the children asked, why does she get to sit way back there? And they were doing a lesson on animals. And the teacher said, I'll tell you why. She said, who here in this group can tell me what nocturnal means? And no one said anything. So she shouts my daughter's name and she says, hey, what does nocturnal mean? My daughter looks up from her book and goes, active at night, and then goes right back into her book. And she goes, and that's why you get to sit back in the back of the room. And it was like, what it's really showing kids is that equal and equitable are not always the same thing, and fair and equal are not the same things. And those are important lessons to model to students because it doesn't mean the same thing when you just say it, right? So those opportunities are precious.
I definitely agree with you, what you were just saying. What I love about students at my school is that they are very compassionate. I especially noticed it from fourth grade on because they study the book Wonder. And we even have a huge fundraiser for the Craniofacial Association, and we have somebody come by the school to visit. And the students really have a good conversation on empathy. And I don't want to say that that's the exact reason why they suddenly changed, but with being around their classmates for so long, they learn to work with them, even themselves. So even seeing the teacher modeling that behavior, they also demonstrate the compassion and empathy and positive role model behavior as well. And I love the community and the diversity within my school with demonstrating that kind of behavior. I mean, of course, when they're younger, they question a lot. We have students who don't understand why others would have the tantrums or would be wanting to pace back and forth or would need a quiet time, like in a little sensory area. But over time, they develop the empathy by seeing how they work with their classmates. And I absolutely love just how much they grow over time with that. So I'm going to cry too.
I know. Like you guys, I'm like, this is the end. That was beautiful. Like, that is such a perfect ending. I'm like, I don't even know what else we were going to talk about, but that is perfect. You guys, like, I think that's so wonderful and it just teaches everyone to be kind and wonderful. And you guys are awesome. So thank you so much for all of that. I really do think that's a good wrapping up point because it was just really beautiful. But is there any final tips that you really wanted to talk about that you didn't get to say before I make you answer my last question?
I'm definitely going to mention the word empathy is really huge when working with so many diverse needs, whether they be gifted or low on the spectrum. Keeping an open mind, learning their quirks, what they like, what they don't like, and adapting yourself to them really helps them flourish within your classroom.
I would add for parents of kids with special needs, courage. You're already exhausted because you've had to be your child's advocate in a number of scenarios. You've had to be your child's advocate financially with your insurance company, with your medical team, with getting the care that you need, maybe even with your family members. And you're exhausted and you always think you're tapped out. And so sometimes it can be sort of freeing to just send your child off into the school environment or the academic environment, be like, it's theirs for the next 8 hours hours.
See you later.
But at the same time, one of the things that I hear very often when I'm, in social media and listening to people talk is a feeling like I'm going to wait to put something like a 504 or an IEP in place until something is concerning. And the time to put those plans in place is when everything's going well and everybody's getting along. And then you have those, like I said, you don't have to send a PowerPoint presentation about your kid. Like I said, extra, but being able to say, like, I know that there are going to be some modifications that my child needs. And I know from history, I am the expert on my child. And, say what you will about, every child is a special little snowflake and we don't want to deal with parents. You're going to deal with me this way, or you're going to deal with me when there's a problem. And so let's start a relationship now, and let's put it all together, and let's have it codified in some sort of document. And then we'll just assume that everything goes well. And that can be a big ask of schools because it costs money to add those resources and to get those plans in place. But at the same time, it's your legal right. And you as a parent know that there's going to be something that you need.
Very good points, Melissa. I'm learning that this year with my daughter just attending public school, being in a blended classroom. So it's very nice to be able to hear that. Thank you.
How can teachers connect with you online? Because I know, Heidi, you have a blog that I'm sure we could point some people to. So tell us, how can people reach you online if they want to talk with you more?
I do have a blog called Tales from a Traveling Art Teacher. I used to teach at multiple schools and travel from room to room on a cart, but for the past 5 years, I've been in an individual classroom with a saint. I kept the name because that's just how people knew me, but you are able to contact me through there. I also have the Twitter. It's Art with O'Hanley, and you can also send me an email. My email address is hohanley@isd109.org.
Melissa, where can people follow you?
I was once a prolific blogger, and my blog is covered in cobwebs, so I would not send people there necessarily. So I haven't written there in about 5 years, but I used to actually write.
It was a beautiful blog.
I used to write a lot about the kids there, and they were younger, and it was lovely. But, I'm old and tired now. So people can find me, though. I actually work in social media, so I'm always online. They can find me on Twitter as @sweetlyvoiced, and they can find me on Facebook. There's lots of Melissa Lees. So if you look for my maiden name, Melissa Bayland Lee, Baland, and you'll find me there.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, my last question that I ask all of my guests, and that is, which artwork changed your life?
Oh, that was a hard one because I have 3.
Okay. You can tell all 3 and we'll stay here for a while, or you can just pick your favorite.
I'll try making it as brief as I can. My very first one was Sunday Afternoon by George Seurat. I loved how all of the dots put together in the different colors when you stand far away and you can see the actual image. So it's just looking at that at a different perspective. My next one is That Which I Should Have Done and Did Not Do by the artist Ivan Albright. It was a painting that took him over 10 years, and it's so overly detailed, and it's the size of a door. And when you look up close, again, it's just the amount of work put into it that just makes it beautiful. And then my final one I would say is my most recent, and it was Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. Being able to see that painting hanging in the museum in person and being able to walk up close to it just completely changed my passion for being able to teach art projects within my classroom.
Yeah. His work in person is just
amazing.
It's something special. I went to the Van Gogh Museum this past summer, and I loved him before, but now I'm in love with him. It's amazing. Okay, Melissa, do you have an artwork that changed your life? It can be a music piece as well.
I was going to say, I thought about this. I've had exposure to lots of artwork, but I am a musician and poet at heart. And I think the most powerful combination of the two was a collection of poetry written in the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II. And it was written by children. And this collection of poetry, it later became, I think, a very famous play. But where I first experienced it when I was in college was set to music. It was set to a soprano and a saxophone, just a lone saxophone. And it was just so eerie and poignant and written by children and combined so many of the things that I care about in life in terms of life and death and the richness of that experience and loss and children and music and art and poetry. And it was called I Never Saw Another Butterfly by Lori Laitman.
Wow. I'm writing this down. I can't wait to look that up. Do you know if it's online?
You can probably find it online.
Yeah. We'll link to it in the show notes if we can find it. Well, this was a wonderful conversation, you guys. I'm really excited about it. I think a lot of people will really connect with it. So I really appreciate you opening up about your stories and joining me today on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It was really nice to be able to talk about it as a parent and as an educator.
Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us an honest rating on iTunes. This will help other teachers find us and hear these amazing stories. Do you want even more art inspiration? Sign up for Art Class Curator's once a week email newsletter, Your Weekly Art Break. Teacher Sarah Warnock says, I truly do take a break from my busy week to check all your links and feel inspired. Everything you share is relevant, meaningful, and also super helpful. You definitely help me become a better art teacher, and I look forward to your emails each week. You can sign up at artclasscurator.com/artbreak. And as a free gift for subscribing, you'll get 6 free art interpretation worksheets to use in your classroom. Be sure to tune in next week for more inspiring art interviews. Thanks again to Melissa and Heidi for giving us their perspective. Connecting with parents is a vital part of teaching, and I hope our conversation encouraged you to strengthen those connections. Be sure to check out the show notes at artclasscurator.com/26 to learn more about our topic today. Next week, I'm doing a solo episode to share some of my favorite one-day art appreciation activities that you can use to fill the random classroom time gaps that happen during the holiday season.
I've made some very real friends through the blogging community and now the Facebook online community as well. And it's the one opportunity to see them every year. But presenting the workshops gives me, it's a chance to give back to the people who've been giving to you for years, but it's also a chance to share things that you're excited about. But it's also a way to maintain links with people and to kind of stay on top of what's going on.